We said that traditional Islam is what? It's the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah as established and lived by the Rasul and the Sahaba, one. Two, as they've been inherited by the scholars of each Muslim generation from the age of the Sahaba downwards to the time that we live in. And three, that these teachings that have been inherited, they've been passed down, they've been transmitted in a particular way. What's that particular mode? We call that isnad, right? And I want you to think about the isnad in a very particular sense, right? So isnad, when we talk about isnad, we're speaking about lineage. You know, like your isnad as a person is your bloodline, right? So your isnad, your physical isnad, your biological isnad is your bloodline. You have the blood of your parents, and then they have the blood of their parents, and then they have the blood of their parents, all the way back to the grand ancestor, Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, right? That's your biological isnad. Everything has an isnad. We could speak about biological isnad. We could speak about there's a genetic isnad, right? So the way that you look, your features, your physical features, there's a genetic isnad. There's a genetic kind of ancestry or lineage, right? Um, that's fine again, inshallah. Allah bless. So there's a genetic isnad. Your nose and its dimensions is coming from somewhere, right? And your eyes and the way that they look is coming from, you have a genetic isnad, right? So ideas likewise. So in the same way, you physical beings, we have a biological isnad or a genetic isnad. Ideas have an isnad. Every idea has a ancestry, has a lineage, right? And it's important to be able to trace ideas back. This is one thing that we don't do. So ideas emerge. Somebody might push out an idea. What you should be doing as a kind of as a sophisticated, sensible human being is trying to look for where this idea coming from, because ideas can sound good. Sometimes ideas sound better than they are, right? Sometimes a bad idea can sound like a good idea because of the marketing and the branding, and it's been pushed out so well, right? The videography is really good. The graphics are really nice. So someone's pushing a problematic idea and it seems really good because the presentation's so good, right? So how do we get beyond that? How do we get beyond being fooled by the power of the speaker, how eloquent he might be, how good his presentation skills might be, how nice the slides are, how good the branding is, how nice the videography is, right? Because this is what's out there now. This is what's happening. In people are speaking in the name of Islam, and the mode of their communication is so skillful and so sophisticated, people don't even focus on the ideas. They're just thinking, oh, this guy's very eloquent. I like the way he speaks. This guy makes me feel good, right? This guy's videography is really nice. The lighting is really good. And so we kind of stop there for a lot of us, right? What we need to start doing is thinking about what they're saying, number one, and number two, evaluating what they're saying in terms of where it's coming from, right? So what's the ancestry of this idea? Right? I'll give you examples. So if you think about a lot of contemporary ideas that we have, right? They trace back to they have an ancestry, right? So if you think about the idea, even like if you think about the concept of, there's actually a really good study on like something like modern warfare. If you look at bombing, right, the study of modern warfare and bombing, this idea of how the moderns do war and how the moderns, this idea of the bomb itself and using particular style of bombing, right? If you trace back the idea, where did this type of understanding around warfare, where did it come from? Where does it originate? How does it come about? Philosophically, it's coming from somewhere. Knowing its origin will be able, if you know its origin, you can explain why it is the way it is. In the same way, physically, right? For example, yeah, Farhan. But if physically, for example, how can you explain your features? Why do you look the way you look, right? You can explain your features. You can explain your temperament. A lot of these things can be explained by looking at your ancestry, by looking at your lineage, your isnad, biologically, genetically, physiologically. Likewise with ideas. You can explain ideas within Islam, outside Islam, historical ideas, religious ideas, spiritual ideas. They're coming from somewhere. If you can understand where they're coming from, you can explain why they are the way they are, right? And this is exactly what's being spoken about here. So when we talk about Islamic beliefs or Islamic practices, right? And uh, Islamic spirituality, for example, when we speak about these things, just these three dimensions, right? The fiqh, the aqidah, and the tasawwuf, for instance, you just look at those three. It has to have an isnad, it has to have an ancestry that leads right back to the Prophet ﷺ with a continuous chain of transmission, right? That's what we mean by isnad here. And here's the thing about transmission. So we're not talking about hadith here, because usually when we use the word isnad, we're talking about hadith, right? That's like a very specific usage. Like, what's the isnad for this hadith? And so you begin to narrate that, okay, this hadith, I received it from so and so, and he took it from so and they took it from so and all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. That's a very particular usage of the word isnad. But the idea of the isnad is not specific to that, right? The idea of the isnad applies to all Islamic teachings, all understandings. For example, somebody, and it applies in three ways. And I'll give you the example straight after this. There's three types of isnad that we're looking for with every idea, right? One, we're looking at the isnad. This is in the notes here. So we're looking at the chain, the isnad in transmission. In transmission. So that idea, has that idea been reported from somebody historically, right? Have the scholars ever held that position? That belief that somebody is claiming, right? Has that belief been held historically uh, in the ages before, in kind of preceding ages, all the way back to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? So one thing we're looking for is the transmission of that idea through subsequent eras and generations, right? Can we trace it back? Is the transmission continuous? Whatever the idea is. So, like we mentioned before, right? Somebody says that Muslims believe that human beings do not have free will, for instance. That's the claim. That's the idea, right? Now the question is, can I find that idea transmitted from the earlier people, from the age of the Rasul down to the Tabi'een and thereafter, in every age of scholarship, do we find that to be a position or a belief that was held, right? That's one. The other thing about the isnad, you have to establish the isnad has to be established with regards to the transmission, but it also has to be established with regards to the understanding that someone's claiming, right? So, for example, a verse of the Quran, somebody gives some kind of new interpretation of those. This is happening a lot, by the way, right? So, if you look at things like progressive or liberal tafsir, this has become a literature now. It's become a genre, right? People talk about liberal tafsir of the Quran, feminist tafsir of the Quran. It's been a phenomena, right? We have people that write on this, like it's been active for the last 15, 20 years, right? Feminist interpretations of hadith, for instance, very common. So people will like they will use their own criteria for evaluating the authenticity of a hadith and the meaning of a hadith, right? It has to fit with the ideology. Sometimes the transmission, the wording might be accurate. Somebody might be quoting Quran, somebody might be quoting hadith, and as we mentioned, every deviant sect in Islamic history, all the way to the modern age, they all appeal to the Quran. They'll quote some verse, and the Quran is so vast that you can do that with it. Somebody can take the Quran and it's so broad and so vast and so expansive, you can bend it and malign it and make it suit your agenda, which is what people generally do, right? So the extremists will quote like the extreme quote unquote fundamentalist types, Islamists, they'll quote the Quran and they'll quote verses of the Quran to justify their agenda. And so everyone's citing Quran and everyone's citing Hadith and so on and so forth. But the question then is, how do I know your understanding is sound, right? So there has to be an isnad. The isnad, this transmission, this inheritance, has to be established in terms of the wording, and it also has to be established in terms of the understanding.